Hello and welcome to the Canon podcast, your home on the Star Wars Underworld podcast network for in-depth discussion on lore, the High Republic, and the whole canon of the galaxy far, far away. My name is Matthew, and I am joined all the way across the continent by your friend of mine, Mr. Joel Davis. Joel, how are you doing this week?
I'm doing great.
You're doing great. You're doing great. I'm looking forward to our show today. I know you're looking forward to our show today. As promised, we are diving back into Rogue One with
And
an
by the
in-depth
way,
look.
I was
So
going to
go
say,
for it.
I love our thumbnail. I love our
Yes.
thumbnail for this particular episode. So good
Yes.
work to the thumbnail.
That thumbnail is fire. It's
Carl.
it'll hopefully our episode today will match the fire that is the thumbnail. As promised, we are diving back into Rogue One with an in-depth look at its radical and protest politics, getting you set for Andor, which drops. Checks my notes here next week with its 3-part series premiere. So Joel, I know you're looking forward to that. Just a few bit of plugs here off the top. Follow us on Twitter and Instagram at Ion Cannon Pod, and follow us on Spotify as well, the audio only versions, and also hot off the press news. Hot off the press. We're also on Apple Podcasts, looking at Google and Stitcher as well, and other podcatchers wherever you get your podcast content. You're definitely welcome to spread the word around, and also on our audio only feeds, you'll get the Tractor Beam, my weekly comic book review, every Thursday or Friday, usually Friday, because the books come out Wednesday. And yeah, this past week got to the ongoing Star Wars number 27 by Charles Soule, the wonderful family that from Crimson Dawn is escaping the Death Star, and glad to be able to pick that up. So that's check that out on our Spotify and Apple, and hopefully soon Google and Stitcher. Also, as you can see, if you're joining us or seeing us on Twitch, we are on Twitch at Ion Cannon Pod, and of course on Twitter Live. Hopefully that's up and running. Hopefully that's all working fine. We'll see. Check it out after here. Who knows? Here, cross our fingers, roll the dice, all that stuff. Trying things new. Okay. First, before we dive into kind of our week in Star Wars, we were able to go on to Doc Holocron's channel. I'm not sure if he's uploaded it yet, but he has uploaded it. Okay, good. Talk about all about these 3 trailers that dropped from D23. I'm stylishly saying D23. You got the hopefully last Andor trailer. You've got the Mandalorian season 3, and of course my favorite, Tales of the Jedi. So we went for about an hour and 40 minutes on Saturday night, gone on that. So Joel, I will be ruthless with time here. One thought from one D23 trailer, go.
Mandalorian looks beautiful. I can't wait for Andor, and I think Tales of the Jedi might be my favorite of the batch so far. I'm excited for October.
There we go. That was a very concise way of doing 3 trailers. I appreciate that, actually. That was a good job. Yeah, my one thought is with that Tales of the Jedi trailer, I'm even more looking forward to that series. Looking forward to that series probably more than anything else, just because for 2 reasons. Because it's prequel set in the Clone Wars prequel era, and of the space wizards that I love, and also because Dave Filoni has a direct hand. He has, of course, direct hand in Mandalorian, but a direct hand in this continuation of the Clone Wars that is my favorite series of all time. Dave Filoni will always find a way to surprise you. Who knows? It might not be a big jaw-dropping reveal of anything, but at least even that first episode that we saw at Star Wars Celebration was something, a new angle to Ahsoka's character and Ahsoka's story that definitely felt needed in the moment. So looking forward to that. I believe in October, is that October 26th is when that drops, my half birthday.
Yes,
October, somewhere around there. Okay, fair enough. Somewhere around October, or at my half birthday. Sure, I'll claim it anyway, whenever that is. All right, so yeah, definitely check out Doc Holocron's channel for our full thoughts. I'm sure we'll have opportunity to give even more, but got to move on. Our week in Star Wars, Joel, you had a thing to say. Go for it.
Yes, I do. I was looking through some interviews for The Mandalorian. It's going to go back to what we talked about. And, Mr. Giancarlo Esposito, Moff Gideon himself, had some interesting words, had some interesting things to say. So let's just see what he had to say. Talked during an interview. talking about Mando season 3's character, and he said something particularly interesting. He said, "When someone steps out, when everything falls apart, and you have no leadership, we all would want someone to stand up and have some kind of vision for how to be about all of us. Gideon has been given the wardenship over a particular part of geography landmass, and he sees that the other wardens aren't really as strong and powerful as him. And that's something that's kind of been interesting me for quite a bit, because like throughout most of the Mandalorian, yes, we have been fighting the Empire, you know, all things said and done, but it's like, you know, obviously the Empire is not some unified force anymore. The Empire is gone. Even episode one, they say like they're warlords and bandits and stuff. So it's like Gideon can't just be the only guy in town. There has to be other factions out there, and I'm just kind of curious if we're going to see some Imperial infighting among the whatever groups are left within the known galaxy, because we know there are groups in the unknown galaxy, and Palpatine's isolated all there on Exegol, just doing his thing. So it's like, what about? And I don't know, like Thrawn could be just doing his own thing as well, for all we know. So it's like, who are these other wardens? Who are these other people? Do they all get along? Do they all have their own little ideologies and ways of like bringing back the Empire, or are they just content just staying in their own little hubble and just kind of ruling themselves? So I'm curious, and I hope we get more of that kind of what's going on in the realm of the Empire at the moment. Oh, you got quiet on me, Matthew. I cannot hear you.
It's 2022 already. I'm still already muted. The Zoom meeting thing. Anyway, I was just trying to keep the noise away, keep the flies away. But I got my own thoughts blocked as well. Every story from the Empire written after Andor, at least in New Canon, and I gather in Legends as well, has been about the Shatter. Has been.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, the comic itself was called Shattered Empire. Clearly, the only thing holding them together was fear of Palpatine, and without that, fear of Palpatine manipulating all their different self-interests, and so without that, what do they have to cooperate for? What do they have to work together for? I do think someone like Thrawn can unify them. I mean, that again is in Legends. We see in Rebels. We see in the Ascendancy trilogy, for whatever that's worth, a character who leads by respect as opposed to fear. So if there is any kind of cooperation with the Empire, it would be under Thrawn. And we know he's coming. Again, it's a great question. Is Gideon, is even Sloane or whoever's out there willing to cooperate with what Thrawn is up to, or are they always going to devolve back to their own self-interest? I mean, that is the dark side. It always curves in on itself, to use the classic 3rd, 4th century Christian phrase, curved in on itself notion here of St. Augustine, and ultimately ends up saying, I'm gonna pursue my narrow interest, and that'll always butt against the wider common good. And so the invisible hand doesn't quite work in that way. And so it'll be an interesting thing to see. They've teased this big bad with Thrawn or with whoever, someone above Gideon, so that might feel like that's being reneged on, but I don't know if that's true or not. We'll see. It depends on how they execute it too. Anyway, you have any further thoughts on that, Joel?
No, I'm just kind of curious if that's sort of very interesting look at we've seen the Empire, but sort of like, okay, well, are they all operating under the same banners? Like that one base we saw, that who's following who? It's like, what remnants, and are we just in Moff Gideon's little remnant territory? It's like, it's a big galaxy, so for all we know, there could be other little remnant territories that are all controlled by other people.
Mm-hmm. And another thing to keep in mind that we came up on Saturday night when we were talking about the Mandalorian is Gideon's in chains. I mean, not literally, because the New Republic is hopefully more humane than that, but he's a prisoner of the New Republic, and so that changes maybe how he plays his allegiances, what kind of information he gives up, who he's willing to betray, who he's willing to protect, and what he's willing to protect other than himself, of course.
And as I said, as I also had said on Saturday, like has Snoke been activated yet?
Yes.
Has Palpatine has activated Snoke's too, and it's now like, all right, you go out there because that's
Right.
Snoke's whole thing. And if you follow, I don't have Shadow of the Sith, but I do have that book, Star
Mhm.
Wars, one that talked a little about Snoke. Like his whole thing is like Snoke's supposed to be the kind of, all right, gather all these forces, desperate forces, and unify them
Right.
under you, because you're like my proxy, Snoke. You gotta do this, and then the First Order will obviously come about from that. 'Cause I don't think the First Order as an organization yet has yet to be formed. Even in Shadow of the Sith,
Mhm.
Pride talks Colonel Pride. He talks about how there's no us only now that there's some sort of semblance of an imperial high command giving
Right.
orders. So it'll be interesting to see if we start to see things move in that direction of like a resemblance of imperial hierarchy.
Yeah, it's again these large scale questions that we're all here for. I mean, this whole the main our main discussion will be about larger political questions, and so hopefully they come to some sort of. Well, I don't think they're going to come to some sort of answer in this season of the Mandalorian. I think that's going to focus on Mandalore, but you never know. I mean, there might be more with Gideon as well. Another thing, one last point I'll say that came up on Saturday night in our podcast is with on Doc's channel is they're hiding him. They hid him from all promotional material,
Mhm.
except for his appearance at D23, which kind of counts as promotional material. But uh, yeah, not any sort of trailer story content that we get lots from Bo-Katan. So at least the first part of Mandalorian is going to be season 3 is going to be this Mandalore story, Sundari, everything to do with the dark saber, all that juicy stuff that, frankly, I find more interesting than the Gideon stuff. But your mileage may vary. So, anyway, I think we should move on to sending the tractor beam. And this is something we're both very interested in talking about. Obi-Wan Kenobi issue number 4, written by Christopher Cantwell and Ario Anindito, with art by Ario Anindito. That came out 2 weeks ago. Go check the tractor beam for that because yeah, it was one of those uh, very very different issues. It was in the middle of it. There's this poem on death and the meaning of life in the face of death, and Obi-Wan staring down this warlord who's gone rogue. And it was one of those special issues that it really took the time, like Luke and Ray and Octo, taking the time to actually reflect on things. And what also the framing device actually really coming to the fore. Your Obi-Wan in his hut, reflecting at the end of his life on the a point where he really came to had to come to some conclusion about death that he already had, but it was this poetic meditation on it and how life still has meaning. Joel, you have a bit of a different angle that you want to address that I entirely agree with, but uh, you go for it with
It's
this issue.
it's nice to see the Clone Wars depicted outside of the Clone Wars 2008 style, which I've always felt was a little bit too maybe original trilogy esque, a little too serial battle of the week. Oh no, it's the Separatists. They're up to some evil scheme. It's not until like later season where you start to get a little bit
True.
more of that kind of um, less binary thinking of good and evil. And this is sort of how I've always felt the war was depicted, at least in terms of what the prequel trilogy was trying to tell you. And the Dark Horse comics really went this way too. It's like, no, this is a deadly war where everyone hates each other. There's no glory. I mean, there's no glory war anyway. But it's like the Republic and the Separatists. It's like they're just causing destruction, and everyone's got to deal with it. And it's
Mhm.
like the Jedi are just being all the Jedi are just being pushed mentally to a breaking point that they probably haven't felt in a long time, if at ever. And just these battles, which were just devastating to watch, and sort of the authoritarianization of the Republic as it goes away year after year. And I just I want to see more of that kind of
Mhm.
depiction of the Clone Wars. It's not just now here's Anakin, we gotta stop Sarge Ventress, Count Dooku got his evil scheme this week. We gotta
Yeah.
show the independent forces, local forces, sort of the war, sort of like how it's just changing and destroying everything. It's like the point of no return. because the Clone Wars is supposed to be like the worst war the galaxy's ever had, and the 1,000 years, and still people are still feeling the ramifications of it to this day in the Star Wars history. So it's like, I like seeing kind of that angle of the Clone Wars being depicted outside of just TCW and all that stuff. So it's nice to see them to bring the point back up.
The Revenge of the Sith crawl. There are heroes on both sides. Evil is everywhere. The moral corruption of the Republic. I mean, the end of the end. I mean, High Republic is the beginning of the end. The Clone Wars is this final stamping out. This is not a democracy anymore, because it's been engulfed in flames of war, and of course that is Darth Sidious's plan all along. And Kenobi, in his hut on Tatooine 20 years later, knows that very clearly. I mean, I think there's comments from even before that, we were all deceived. I think that's in the Siege of Mandalore even. So
you're deceived by a lie.
Yeah, and this issue again, it shows the effect of the corrupting effect of war. Where we tend to valorize it, and there's something to valorize, or not valorizing loss, but memorializing loss in a healthy way. I think Americans who yesterday marked 9/11, that's legitimate. All of us in Her Majesty's realms who marked the death of Queen Elizabeth. There's something I'd say legitimate to that. I know not everyone agrees with that, but to memorialize war itself as a morally uplifting prospect. I mean, that's just again going into the real world thing. I mean, a good Memorial Day or Remembrance Day here in Canada, a good way of marking that is to acknowledge the morally corrupting power of violence. And so that's a great point, Joel, that this issue goes into that with this character, this general, and yet also shows how Kenobi holds his own and holds up the dignity and value of life, even despite all the death all around him. So and then we got Jordan here talking about monarchy. Thanks, Jordan. So do you have any further thoughts on Kenobi number 4 or anything else, Joel?
No, I would just like, if there's more Clone Wars content, I want to see it kind of in a different style. Kind of can keep going with those more darker ideas and those more morally questionable things. I think it's well worth it.
Yeah, and just one last note about style. Talk about visual style. Well, I mean, I love the animation of the Clone Wars series, especially in those.
I'm more writing style, not
Yeah, sure. But whenever I see, to me, the visual is intrinsically part of it. Ario Anindito is one of my favorite artists right now, and his ability to present. I mean, you talk about tone and mood. His ability to set the tone and the mood with his art is second to none. And so thank you, Ario, for all your great work. Okay, main topic, Rogue One, radical politics. Joel, let's take it away.
Well, I guess we should start with our opening salvo. Let's actually talk about what we think of Rogue One in general, because I've been thinking about this for a while. It's a movie we don't talk about a lot on this channel. I felt like we talked more about Rise of Skywalker, and maybe that's because we had so much Shadow of the Sith hype, because that's sort of our niche. Which is funny because we also don't talk about Last Jedi a lot too, and that's probably one of our favorites.
Yeah.
But I'll just give my kind of opening salvo, and I kind of have like two big things about Rogue One. I'm sorry for the lighting. If I keep my face like this, I'll be fine.
Your lighting's better than mine. I'll put it that way.
No, I think your lighting's fine.
All right. Anyway,
but Rogue One to me is very much, I think, modern Star Wars in like the purest form possible. So I don't want to make I'm not making a judgment call on or anything like on Force Awakens, the movie prior. But that was very much the nostalgia of kind of the A New Hope plot a little bit, but also kind of keeping very much in that sort of, but also kind of in a not in a modern way, but definitely keeping a lot of the same tropes as well. Although it's funny because I was actually talking to people on Discord, like a lot of 18 and younger people who were like, to them Force Awakens was very much their awakening into Star Wars. So it's like it definitely captured, I think, almost a younger audience, despite being very nostalgia heavy in certain ways.
Mhm.
So it's kind of interesting, that kind of dynamic there. But I won't get into that. That can be another topic for later. But for Rogue One, you have the original trilogy era, which to a lot of people is still kind of Star Wars in the kind of general sense of that is Star Wars Rebellion versus Empire, that sort of thing. And obviously that's going to appeal to the older audience anyway, because that is the actual era they grew up with: X-wings, Tie fighters, actual Yavin, that sort of thing. Um, but the writing and the story is a more grown-up story. It's a more mature story. It's not you know punk, punky Luke, not punky, like plucky Luke Skywalker.
Lucky,
He
yeah.
had to blow up the
Sorry.
Death Star, and because his Uncle Owen won't let him go out and hang out with his friends and
Mhm.
pick up those power converters. It's like got morally gray Cassian Andor shoots a guy in the back first
Mhm.
shot, and then you kind of got um Jyn Erso, kind of semi-nihilistic person who gave up and kind of needs to come back to it, and sort of like is dealing with various deeper thoughts and ideas for a more mature audience. So in that way, it's very much modern Star Wars, which is take
Mhm.
Star Wars, take a pre-established thing. We're not making a new era. We're taking what's already there, what Lucas already did, and we really are building upon it in a new way. My second big point I want to make is Rogue One is also the best example of a film by committee.
Mhm.
Which is ironic because both Rogue One and Last Jedi are probably my two favorite Star Wars film period, and my two favorite of the Disney era, and they're both very different. Rogue One is filmed by committee. It is, got had three writers, had two directors, pretty much. John Knoll was the guy who pitched it to Lucasfilm. It's like, okay, we're gonna do this war film. Um, Compared to the Last Jedi, which is very much Rian Johnson wrote, direct, he didn't produce. That was Ron Birdman, but very
Mhm.
much as much creative freedom as possible. Rogue One was very much had a bunch of people working on it all at once. So it turned out, and had a lot of reshoots, especially that third act. So, but yeah, those are my kind of two opening salvos for Rogue
Mhm.
One, a Star Wars story. But Matthew, I guess you're kind of just opening thoughts on this film and
Yeah, so I mean, a few things is I've been able to mention just when I saw it in IMAX twice in a weekend, right, a few weeks ago. So, yeah, if you want more further thoughts on my thoughts on Rogue One, go back to those episodes. I will say one thing that I have gotten to think about. We talk about by committee and the out of universe, the real world circumstances of this film. I think specifically about what makes Tony Gilroy special, and so kind of along the lines that you've mentioned before. This goes back actually to our guest spot on the flagship show on a few Thursdays ago when we showed up on Star Wars Underworld, talking about the contrast with Star Trek and why Star Trek doesn't seem to suffer as much from competing definitions of what it is. And I thought, and this will get me to the Tony Gilroy point. Trust me, it's a bit of a train, but I got to get there. The thing about Star Trek was a TV series that wasn't as popular, and then it became popular in the 70s in syndication, and then there were films, and then there was another series, and then on and on. But it was just much more drawn out and dragged out, and so it wasn't compared to Star Wars, where there is this one flashpoint moment. May 25th, 1977 is burned in the memory of so many folks in our society, in our culture, because they were kids. And when you see something new and flashy and exciting as a kid, by definition, and this is a great thing, sparking your imagination, sparking your sense of wonder and excitement about what is possible, both in this world and just in life and in entertainment. And so, someone like J.J. Abrams is May 25th, 1977 is a definitive moment for him. It
John Favreau, Dave
For
Filoni.
Jon Favreau, for Dave Filoni somewhat, but I think for Dave Filoni and for Deborah Chow, and for myself, and for talk about
I
speaking
think
of
they're
the
younger, right?
SW, Chris Segal saying mall packaging is nostalgic, being in the theater in 1999 and in 2002, 2005 also definitive moments that
2015 too.
yeah,
I would
and,
say.
and like you were saying, exactly, with the even younger generation coming in 2015, you can point to these points for all of us, and so that means that there's parts we love and latch onto, parts we don't necessarily connect to as well sometimes, but what it can do at its worst, and I think what we see often is say, no, this is what Star Wars is. No, this was what Star Wars is. No, this is what Star Wars is. And here's my point: is Tony Gilroy has none of that. He does not have a definitive moment in his childhood, in his upbringing, in his film going, movie professional life, or I'm using my hands too much. His film going professional life, or in his just the sparking of his animation or his imagination to say this is what Star Wars is, and it can't be anything else, and I have to recapture that. And so that's what's so exciting about Rogue One, I think, but for the first and foremost, and why I'm so excited about Andor is he's coming at it saying, this is the story I'm going to tell. Yes, this is how it connects with this sandbox, this larger canon, but I'm bringing in all these real world considerations, because there's room for it, and because it can make a compelling, not just a compelling Star Wars story, but a compelling story. And that's what Rogue One does so great. I will say, in contrast to The Last Jedi, to some extent, yes, it is it does deal with wider themes of heroism and legacy and whatnot. It does it within Star Wars, and so it is both a great Star Wars story and a great story, and then also a great story. Rogue One is a great story, and therefore it's also a great Star Wars story, if that makes any sense. So, and again, why I'm looking forward to Andor, again, because you talk about people who aren't maybe necessarily the biggest fans of Star Wars, not that they dislike it, but say I think about my dad and how he is kind of a bit later to the whole genre fandom thing. I took him to see a Rogue One, and he instantly got World War II. He instantly got military spy, taking stealing Nazi plans and feeding them to the Allies, getting into the Allies, right? There's that resonance of real world history that Rogue One touches on, that I think can be very resonant to our culture and our age, can be very challenging to our culture and our age. And so it's a little surprising, actually, just how popular Rogue One is in that respect, because there are themes in there that, I remember in 2016, the Trump campaign saying, "Oh, avoid Rogue One because it's radical politics," and that's why I was drawn to it. But there's something there. So there's my overall salvo.
Rogue One came out at a very good time.
Yeah,
I think like Rogue One was one of those movies like you couldn't have asked for a better time in terms of what was going on in the world. It's like kind of the message of that movie. It's like, oh, you came out just at the right time, didn't you? So yeah, you're right. Like Rogue One and Last Jedi are like the two that I feel like a lot of non-Star Wars fans actually tend to really like. I do think Force Awakens also has that too, because I noticed a lot of people did jump on after Force Awakens. A lot of people just did not care. Now finally did. Like that is very much it's very much a fact that after Force Awakens, fandom just exploded with new people. Yeah. So I definitely think those three films in particular were like definitely brought in a lot of new people. And then the one and I think after that, it really was Mandalorian that did the next big jump of bringing in new folks. I actually, that was going to be one of my early This Week in Star Wars, for like the 4 Star Wars things that are good jumping on points. But I guess, kind of get our little thought. Let's actually talk about, the protest politics of it all. And, Rogue One is very interesting because, again, it's taking a familiar setting of the rebellion versus the Empire, but it's not showing showing that sort of black and white mentality of it all. It's very much it opens up with actually it opens up with Krennic, but the next scene after that showing Cassian having to shoot a guy in the back because he got to get this information. And it's like, well, you got to do it. You just got to. He's gonna hold it down, and it's interesting. Kind of, I feel like, and I put this note down later, but I think I can add this now. Is I feel like the rebellion's whole arc. I feel like on the dynamic you have. Oh, I don't know who. You got that one guy in the Rebel Council. It's like, let's just give up. I forget his name. And then you got Saw Gerrera on the other side. And I feel like in some ways the rebellion's arc is to move closer to the Saw Gerrera side of it all. That more we gotta be an active approach. We gotta take the initiative. We gotta be on the offensive. Um, and I think very much. I think Saw is correct, and I think the movie almost says Saw is right. Just Saw himself as a person has been so consumed by the cause, and is sort of, kind of no longer, he himself by the end, I think, realizes like, I'm old, I'm out of touch. Maybe not out of touch, but just sort of, I'm old, I've lost it. Well, yeah, I guess out of touch mentally. But Jen, you and your ilk can continue the work. You got a sharper mind. You got a better mind for it. Save the rebellion, save the dream. And I feel like the rebellion kind of goes more in that direction by the end as they make the assault on Scarif and they decide to be proactive in the rebellion, not just reactive.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things George Lucas was trying to imply with the original trilogy, at least, is at least especially with Return of the Jedi, is this weird gray line between heroism and terrorism, in the sense of anyone fighting against a large evil empire, freedom fighter versus terrorism, rather, I should say, and guess somewhat with the rebels and the Ewoks and fighting against the Empire, but we still, with the original trilogy, have this sense of Luke and Leia and Han and them even Han being very squeaky clean compared to what we know of radical movements today, radical movements in the real world. And, because part of that is the focus on the evil of the Empire and the narrative being moving, from, talk about Luke's hero's journey as well. But the narrative of, here are a bunch of actual people who care about freedom, democratic norms, institutions to some extent, kind of what we were talking about with Mon Mothma last week and the week before, whatever. But we have Viet Cong, we have they're not always necessarily us, is my point here. And having these Ewoks in their who speak a weird different language and in their little huts and with their primitive weapons, and they're able to rise up and cause havoc, terrorize these Imperials. I mean, you play that. I haven't played that bonus level in Battlefront, but man, that's terrorizing, right? The Ewok hunt. From what I hear, here we have Rogue One, and it goes a step further. You're right, by fudging that line even more. I mean, you talk about heroes on both sides, evil is everywhere. Again, like you mentioned with Saw, or with Cassian shooting the guy in the back, those moral lines that they have to cross, because again, war is a demoralizing force. Even if your goal is ultimately, in some stage, greater freedom for more people in the galaxy, even with Rogue One, it goes a step further with Saw Gerrera. Where is Saw Gerrera? He is on a planet called Jeddah, and with a place called the Holy City, and there's folks who, again, speak different languages and have different skin color and have different head coverings, and all these allusions to wherever side you might see it, the PLO or Hezbollah or Hamas or even ISIS. To some extent, there are people who, in Saw's group, who would have gone as far as trying to create this radical caliph state. And not necessarily Saw himself, but one of the thing about Rogue One, and this is another point you have kind of further on in contrast to the rest of Star Wars, is the thing about Rogue One, it really does complicate this question of how far is too far, especially given, like you said, given the stakes, given um, given that the Empire has this nuclear bomb, has this super weapon, the power to destroy a planet. How far do you have to go? How far can you sacrifice one life for the sake of billions? And I mean, I frankly don't have an easy answer for that right now, and that's part of the point with Rogue One. Part of the point, even Last Jedi, to some extent, when it comes to heroism and finding the wisdom to show restraint and save what you love as opposed to killing what you hate. There is I mean, that's part of what's compelling, I think, about this film, though, is we don't accept easy answers anymore. We don't accept a guy in a house called White that has the right, always having the right answers, even if he's the guy we voted for or not. I mean, I couldn't vote for either of them, but the we wonder, we question, we ask, and there's a limit to that as well. I will say, I mean, we got to actually step forward and take action and build communities, but yeah, it definitely pushes this question of who are you? I mean, I talk about Cassian and who are you willing to live for? Who are you willing to die for? With Saw, what are you willing to kill for? Is a pertinent question for him, and it's one that it's easy for us to sit here in our cozy little offices and whatnot and houses in North America, and we will never concretely face this question in our lifetimes. That's true, but that's a real thing in the real world, and I'm looking forward to Andor making that suddenly this fight is real for you, making that a little more tangible for us.
Yeah, right. Anna says, Ewok Hunt's the best game type. Yes, it is. But you mentioned
Terrifying,
the Ewoks.
literally terrifying.
You mentioned the Ewoks, and it's like, I'm going to be honest. I feel like a lot of that stuff is honestly kind of half baked. It's like, at the end of the day, just seeing the Ewok just mess with stormtroopers in a very cartoony fashion. It's like, like, oh, you're just defeating the evil henchmen of the Emperor. It's like, that's nothing. We do that all the time. But in Rogue One, we got that scene where we got the Imperial tank going through Jeddah and the civilians. And I'm like, wait a minute, when did I turn to CNN? This was the Iraq War news going on.
Yeah.
Then we got the ambush, and we actually see Saw's groups like just not only attacking the Empire, they should, but they got civilians in the crossfires. Like you never saw the Ewoks got civilians. It was always just, oh look, we got to beat the bad guys. Here it's like they're attacking the Empire, but they're also got civilians in their crosshairs as well, and like that Jin's got to help that one kid out. So it's like taking it into a more even bigger level in that respects as well, which I find very interesting. And again, that Andor's depiction of protest politics is a lot more complicated than say the original trilogy, or which is sort of like at the end of the day, the Empire, they're the bad guys. They got the evil weapon of doom. Got to blow it up. Like they're not contemplating civilian contractors or like nope, they're the bad guys. Stormtroopers, they're the evil henchmen. It's like they gotta. It's like you always beat up your the bad guys' evil henchmen.
Right.
I don't think, although granted, I don't think necessarily they humanize the Empire at all. I think if anything, they make them even worse, more tangible and realistic. It's just they show us the civilian side of warfare and sort of the complications of military strategy.
I mean, one of the things that I think it's the Inferno Squad novel, even Lost Stars is starting to do, everything in the Aftermath trilogy with Sloane. It is starting to humanize the Empire a little bit, and I wonder if that is part of the way into them having a better way of saying we are the Empire, we're the hostiles, and there are reasons why. And it's not morally acceptable to kill. I will say that outright. But there are reasons why people are driven to that conclusion, right? And that's the thing. Again, Rogue One has started to say again, Inferno Squad. I believe it. Is at the moment where I think Saw's, or not like the successors to Saw's partisans. They're still the partisans. Saw is dead, but they're still there, and they kill a whole bunch of civilians, and because they want to attack an imperial target. Leia, Princess of Alderaan, saw in his group assassinate Korsh Panaka because he is an ally to Palpatine, and maybe even in part because Mon Mothma and then we're going to try and use him to turn him and to turn Palpatine, or use the system at least, and Saw as having none of it. It reminds me a little bit about Martin Luther King versus Malcolm X to some extent. I don't quite know the story too much with Malcolm X, I will say that, but there were more radical groups who, for very understandable reasons, believed that America was this evil empire and was not for them. And and you see Martin Luther King. They see Martin Luther King. They agree, and he would also say America in the present, in the '60s, wasn't for him, but he was still willing to sit down with President Johnson and sign that legislation, the voting the voting rights legislation, or work with him on that, while also doing a peaceable protest. I mean, maybe that's the big contrast here.
I actually heard that by the end of Martin Luther King's life, he was actually getting more closer to being a lot more radical and being a lot more aggressive.
Well, he was also a lot more internationalist in that sense. And so part of it is to deconstructing the local nation state in favor of a more multinational vision of a common humanity. And so that does lead to greater understanding about the plight of folks in Latin America, where the CIA has gone in and aided a coup, or here the big the big issue that seems to have no solution in Israel Palestine, the role of American presence in upholding what in some senses is a democracy, in other senses is an apartheid. At the same time, to have that sense of, okay, why then are these other groups driven to this this perspective? Again, it could be this question. Maybe this is part of the tension with Mon Mothma and Saw Gerrera. Part of the tension, I think we ultimately see. I wonder if we're going to see this in that year after Endor. In more stories that come out. I haven't. Again, I admit I haven't read Alphabet Squadron, so I know that there is still the war brewing, and there are probably voices in the New Republic who want increased militarization just to completely wipe out the Empire. And even though I know Mon Mothma has to raise a coalition, and a naval coalition, to actually go to Jakku, but she's trying to use diplomacy. She's trying to use.
Well, I feel like we're being too simple though about it, right?
Okay.
Like, are Saw and Mon Mothma really that different? You can't fight the Empire by just having peaceful protests. Right. Palpatine's gonna blow you up if you do that. Like, what do you want? We gotta go stand in the Imperial Palace and go, Palpatine is unfair. Mr. Krabs is in there. Sorry. So he's gonna force his after you and just kill you. So it's like, at the end of the day, it all leads to the Rebel Alliance is not a peaceful movement. They are a armed opposition, akin to the Separatists, akin to the Night. Well, maybe not the Night. Well, they use arms.
Yeah, there's a parallel there for sure.
They do, hit and run tactics. They definitely, they take up arms. They rise up. And it's sort of like, you can only be peaceful for so long. It's like, what do you have marching strikes on the Coruscant? I don't think Palpatine does. Like, even in a lot of the expanded universe material, both Legends and now canon, we see the uprising of Coruscant, where everyone's like, yay, they're tearing down the statue. But then in every EU book, like, the next chapter is, send in the security forces, got to clamp down, kill them all, round them up and kill them all. So it's like, again, how different are the differences are just more like, I feel like Saw Gerrera is just like blow everything up. Mon Mothma wants to be a little bit more tasteful or tactical in her strikes, but it's sort of like, how much is she being tactical, and then how much is she not just taking the risk? Which I think Rogue One, at the end of the day, that's the whole point of their arc. It's like, they're still being too risk averse, and they maybe need to be a little bit more proactive, and that's where the assault on Scarif happens. I mean, Admiral Radis is like,
Yeah.
oh, forget the Rebel Council. I'm just going to go attack Scarif. I'm going with them. So
Yeah, I think the difference is this: is that Mon Mothma is capable of complexity, whereas Saw isn't, and that's where we see, I think, a lot of tension with even protests today. Talking about burn it all down versus, well, here's an incredibly corrupt aspect of this, but how do we best move forward? Even talking about, I mean, shoot, even about talking about the the funeral and the memorial for Queen Elizabeth, and we have folks who say, oh yeah, immediately take to Twitter, take to social media, and all they say is the crown is a colonial symbol and it must be abolished, right? And okay, I see your point there. It's just why take to Twitter and Instagram and enter as opposed to say, here is a very problematic, dangerous aspect of the legacy of the crown. What do we have in the reality today, and how can we move forward with what we've got, because we have to live in a society. And I know that's like a flippant way of saying it, but that is Mon Mothma's, that there is something far more concrete, I think, with Mon Mothma's approach to protest politics, right? It's not like you're saying, it's not like she's actually going to go back to the Senate and bow the knee to the emperor. She still leaves her seat. She goes to the meeting. She leaves her Senate seat, goes to the meeting. You see her reaction when Jin and Radis and them have all gone is the smile, the yes, we're actually taking action. We're actually doing the thing I know is right to do. It does involve taking a strike force to Scarif, but it just is. I mean, it's funny we come back to Mon Mothma because she seems to be more. If you want to talk about an answer of a way forward to, how do we, how do we approach these corrupt, unjust institutions and traditions? At once she says, "I'm going to exist within it," but then, no, to actually protest against it in a way that actually creates change. Mon Mothma is the example of someone who's open to that complexity, whereas Saw Gerrera, here's the thing: is there is a point to naming that injustice. There is a point to naming the traumatic incidents, naming the abuse, and just going full bore on this was terrible. This thing that happened, this aspect of our culture, our society, in terms of our, the way we approach gender and economics, and the way we turn a blind eye to so many people who are suffering. That is unjust. We need to dismantle these systems of oppression. There is a point to saying that. I will grant that. It's just, what do we do when we say that, or are we just spewing hot takes into the ether? And does that actually create the type of coalition, the type of common will to move forward and build communities and build a rebel alliance that can actually take on the empire?
I will say I got way more respect for Saw Gerrera than I do for the people on Twitter. At least he's doing something.
That's true. That is true. You have a great point there. Yeah.
Actually doing the actual heavy lifting. I don't see him like just Saw Gerrera on Twitter going, "Empire sucks" in his room all day.
Yeah.
But what's interesting also is at the beginning of the movie, the Rebel Alliance doesn't want to just crush Saw Gerrera. They want to reconcile. They think they need him just as much as maybe he needs them. It's like they see a value in having a Saw Gerrera in their circle. And I think that's something also interesting. Ooh, excuse me.
Sorry.
As well. It's interesting. I can't wait for Andor. Just a little tangent. I can't wait to Andor to make Mon Mothma very much a secondary character of the sort of Rogue One ether that's been developing with Andor and the Rogue One film. But let's see. I gotta check my notes here. But I guess we've talked a little bit about the rebellion. I guess we can talk about the villains and my personal favorite character of the whole movie, the one and only Director Krennic. Oh, I love Krennic, and I remember that one celebration where they just brought out Ben Mendelsohn in full on costume, and it's like, oh man, that was epic. Still one of the most epic things ever. Mendo. When we talk about humanizing the Empire, I think it's a difference between humanizing and sympathizing. I think there are very two different things. Because Krennic is very much, he's not the end all be all. He's not Vader. He's not Tarkin. He's like he's the most middle of middle managers. He is just the highest end
Stereotypical
bureaucrat.
middle manager almost.
Oh, I mean, yeah, it's like he does all the hard work. He got a lot of underlings, and then the supervisor take his credit. So he's just trying to get by in the world of Star Wars. Um, and I feel like his story is one of the most interesting of just this guy who just so desperately wants to get a promotion and is going to do anything in his power to do so. But he also really believes in the destructive power of the Death Star. And again, to humanize, it's like just someone who becomes so obsessed with this weapon that you're building. It's like, oh, people like this exist, and it's like, oh, that's actually scarier than just your stereotypical "I'm evil, I'm going to build a weathered doomsday device." It's like, no, people actually like building these things and think they're beautiful. Like, oh, it's beautiful. Like that's such a real line when they're testing the Death Star on Jeddah. And I love his. I love his. I also love his his conflict with Tarkin, who, by the way, really good use in the film is sort of also a secondary character alongside Mon Mothma, and just sort of the power dynamic, just how in control Tarkin is. Like Tarkin knows he's the big cheese of the Empire, I mean, which he is. He's like the third in command, pretty much. It's, Vader, Tarkin, the Emperor is kind of the evil trinity of the Empire in a lot of ways. And also just Tark and Krennic's whole relationship with Galen Urso, which I think gets expanded upon more in Catalyst, which you should read. But also just sort of seeing Krennic try to again be that bureaucratic middle manager, just trying to always get a promotion in the ranks. It's a fascinating stuff. But what are your thoughts on Krennic?
I mean, we're talking about a protest politics. It is kind of an out of universe protest by showing us this character. Like I was saying before about the Empire being an imperial characters, imperial actors being driven by their own self-interest so much that they get so curved in on themselves. It's such a beautifully evocative phrase that Augustine has, of being so consumed with your own gain that you yourself become a shriveled parody of yourself. And he thinks, well, and what it is a tragedy, right? It's this tragedy of someone who presumes such greatness in himself, even though in terms of actual performance he's pretty darn mediocre. Someone who is a bit of an outsider, right? He, there's a reason there. One of the reasons they got Ben Mendelsohn, he's fantastic actor, brilliant actor in his own right, but also they let him keep his accent and have this lisp, and he's clearly not from the Coruscant elite. He's trying to break in and thinks he can actually kind of be part of this in crowd that has thus far rejected him, again because he's a bit of an outsider, and I don't quite remember what planet he's from or whatnot. It's clearly kind of similar to Eli Vanto in the sense of someone on the outside looking in, from the outer rim, or from at least the mid rim expansion region, wherever he's from. It almost thinking about false consciousness, right? The sense of, the American dream and how it fails so many people. I can come from the outside, I can go in, I can make my way. Funny real world example, sad real world example is one of our political parties just elected their new leader, who is now the leader of the opposition, and he believes his life is so much this American Canadian dream, and his wife's American Canadian dream of immigrants coming in and thinking they can pull themselves up by the bootstraps, and if only they work hard enough, doesn't matter. We don't need support. We don't need structural supports. We don't need any kind of common good. I can make it happen on my own. Just let me make it happen on my own. And we see time and time again with Krennic. We see with time and time again with folks trying to use the system, they get blocked every single time because they're trusting in the system in part, and they end up failing because they trust in the system. He goes to Vader and says, "So you'll speak to the Emperor for me?" And you know, I mean, yeah, the great dad joke, trying to choke your aspirations. Yeah, it is this, in a way, it is this protest story of, you know, this dream is just, it's this game is not worth playing. If it's all it's going to do is protect these elites, and you know, the elite of the elite, even Tarkin in his upper crust accent, you know, the again, speaking about accents, it is an evocative symbol of status and of upbringing. You know, in universe, that is an elite Coruscant accent that Tarkin has, and he says, "Yeah, I'm going to take over the Death Star project," as you said. Now that it has so much, clearly has so much power and potency to enact fear across the galaxy, and so, yeah, it is this tragedy. Of course, you notice at the end of Rogue One where the Death Star's laser is aimed squarely at. It's aimed at the top of the tower where Tarkin is. It's not aimed anywhere else. It's right through, or sorry, where Krennic is. Right. It's not aimed anywhere else. It's directly fires at him, and then of course hits into the ocean, and then breaks up the planet. And yeah, it is this. It is a beautiful symbol of how much, you know, these systems fail people, how much trusting in this game will just end up ruining you in the end.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting. Also, you brought up uh you brought up you know, the elites and stuff, and it's interesting. Um, Something I've been thinking about, because I've thought in a discussion, is you know, despite the fact the elite of the empire you think is in the core, which it kind of is,
Mhm.
the three leaders of the empire, the Emperor, Vader, and Tarkin, they're all mid rimmers or outer
Mhm.
rimmers. You know, Palpatine's from Naboo, Tarkin's from Ariadu, and Vader's from Tatooine, or
Right.
you know, he's from Tatooine more or less. So they're
But he
not
hates
the leader.
sand, so
He hates it, exactly. But you know, he's not a core worlder. They're not of the core. They don't have that kind of
Hmm.
connection to the core. And it's sort of funny that, you know, Krennic, who I don't think is also a core worlder as well.
Mhm.
I'm not sure about his background.
Well, no, I
Um,
think I know, especially given the accent, right? Is, you
right,
know,
but you know,
and his mannerisms, his kind of you know, he's a bit of a nerd like us, right? He's sweaty, greasy. Anyway.
but you know, it's funny that, you know, that yet the Empire has kind of dissuade its other outer rim worlders, because, you know, like, you know, you're there. They say, even Krennic still can't be like, no, you're not one of us still. You know,
Mhm.
you're not. You're still just the middle manager. So like, I don't know where Krennic's from, but it's like even the mid rimmers or outer rimmers leaders of shit of the Empire, like, nah, we still don't want you around. We can be in charge because we're in charge, but it's sort of interesting that sort of that dynamic of, you know, the Empire being this core world elite, you know, some way, uh, ends up being
Mhm.
uh, led by a bunch of outer rimmer mid rimmers. So I found that interesting.
According to the Wikipedia, thank you Wikipedia, ever trusty, and according to from Star Wars: The Rebel Files, Krennic is from planet what's called Lex Rule in the Mid Rim.
Okay, so he's mid rimmer too.
If that means anything. Yeah,
You know, it's not a core world, so the
yeah,
core is
that's
kind of
true.
where
I mean, I
always.
will say, Palpatine, like, he's so radically abandoned Naboo and his origins, and I mean, anything to do with Naboo. Naboo is all about beauty and family and you know, and art, and everyone coming together, and I mean, in some ways, you know, about agriculture and uh,
Mhm.
the integration of systems and societies, and he's completely abandoned all of that, and he takes the core Coruscant's game and flips it on its head. So there's some sort of radical thing to that too, but in an evil way.
Oh yeah. And I guess I'll talk a little about. They do have the Empire in here. Now, this is probably one of the better, the most interesting depictions of the Empire as
Mhm.
just an entity. Because the Empire can be depicted in so many ways. Like in the saga films, the Empire is just kind of more in that typical fantasy bad guy kind of way. It's like, yeah, they're based off of real world things. At the end of the
Mhm.
day, it's like they're still just the bad guy. You beat up the henchmen, you blast the stormtroopers, you call it a day. It's like, yay, we won. Here it's a lot more realistic. Again, that scene on Jeddah, everything on Jeddah, it's like, who did I turn to CNN all of a sudden?
Yeah.
It's like seeing American troops going through Kabul or Baghdad during that tank scene, or even in Andor, you're seeing the protest in the Imperial Army, with their batons and their shields. It's like, whoa, it's like the coppers taking down protest. It's like, dang, this is
Yeah.
very very real.
Mhm.
So I just sort of just sort of seeing the inner workings of the Empire. It's like the real. I had a friend who once said the real villain of this movie is bureaucracy. It's like, yeah, that's
Yep.
what trips Krennic at the end of the day. Just the imperial hierarchy and bureaucracy.
Mhm.
He's just so desperately trying to keep his commission and get a promotion.
Yeah. And again, to say he's the quintessential bureaucrat, so he's both the perpetrator and victim of this very very heavy system. I'll put it that way.
I mean, in real world events, some of the worst atrocities were committed by people just sitting on their desks signing a paper.
Yeah. Yeah.
Ooh, uh, Ray, Hannah, hey, this is the Ray side.
Yeah.
Hannah says, "I have a question for you both. Is the Empire powerful? I mean, in what sense is it powerful? Is it a very entrenched regime? I mean, it's got a lot of star destroyers and
Mm.
probably could easily destroy planets and small local.
Yeah.
I have an answer for why it's strong and why it isn't. Well, I'll give my answer, and that
Mhm.
is it is a regime that was built upon the ashes of war and a very burnt out society. So, by the time the Clone Wars ended, everyone was just so tired. It's like, just end it, man. Yeah, yeah, Emperor,
Yeah.
good enough. And I think Palpatine was sort of ingenious in that core world, the Republic world. They were so tired and out of it, like, yeah, sure, Emperor,
Mm.
whatever. And the plants that would have been a lot more problematic to keep hold, he already's occupying them. All those separatist worlds that broke off, most of them are probably occupied by the Empire already.
Mhm.
So you have that. But in terms of like how strong the Empire is, I actually think the Empire is a very brittle organization that's just being held together by like a house of cards, really. And just because the opposition is just so weakened at this point
Mhm.
that the Empire just been able to hold on for dear life. And the Death Star obviously was going to be the magnum opus from which Palpatine could finally, just have the unlimited power he wanted and dissolve the Senate. It's not until the Death Star is destroyed, it's like, does that start to really crack and come down? It's like, oh yeah, Empire is a lot weaker than we thought. We have an opposition now in the Rebel Alliance we can go to. Obviously, Hoth was a bit of a blowback to that,
Mhm.
but once the Emperor was destroyed and Vader killed and a lot of the hierarchy killed, like that's why the Empire just so quickly collapsed, because like it had a lot of forces and troops, but never had a lot of popular support among people and the masses. Uh,
Yeah.
and that's why quickly there was a lot of an uprising. Uh, Hannah, if you want to give your comments in the comments, feel free, and we'll read them. Or if your show's coming up next now,
Yeah.
so I'll ask you.
I will jump in and say, this fits exactly with what we're talking about with Krennic. The Empire is, Krennic embodies the way the Empire is entirely a contradiction. It is this projection of military strength, of economic strength, the ability of even bureaucratic strength, and we talked before about the ability, the need that Palpatine has for the Senate, and that his power to use the Senate to enact legislation that controls the galaxy. So, yes, it is this contradiction. Yeah, well, yes, it is powerful in the sense, again, the Death Star is this great symbol of that, the power to wipe away a planet. Um, at the same time, all of its power is focused on one little battle station, moon-sized battle station. All of its power is focused on one person, this decrepit old man. And so, the tighter they squeeze their fingers, the more planets, or the tighter they squeeze, or more planets slip through their fingers. So interestingly, just in terms of pure military power, pure military strength, this does get at the stakes and the opportunity that Rogue One explores, of course, New Hope succeeds on is in the comics, in the Darth Vader comic, I believe the 2015 Darth Vader comic, there is this debate between I think it's, and even in the Tarkin novel, I believe it is. So there's the Tarkin doctrine, which is build one massive honking station, pour all your resources in it, and rule through fear. And then there's the tag doctrine that Thrawn is also behind, is saying, no, we've got to actually spread our forces wide throughout the galaxy using regular old Imperial Star Destroyers that can just go into any planet. And part of that is using the Senate in a smart way. And what's the option that they choose? They choose the flashy, cool option of having one massive Death Star that can incinerate a planet, but also has one very small little weakness that just destroys it completely. And then, when Palpatine is killed, that shatters the whole thing. And so, yes and no to answer your question. Hannah, you're saying they're good at projecting power and strength, but the core, it's really brittle. It's a fascinating structure. The real world evils. I'll just say, like again, coming back to this theme of being curved on yourself, whenever you set up a system that just depends on people I'm going to go look out for myself, and we've somehow decided as a society, as a civilization, that can actually lead to the common good because it drives innovation, it drives economic growth, and maybe to some extent it has for some people, but the idea that the rising tide lifts all boats and just drowning a bunch of people. And so that's the thing we talk about protest. The power to expose those inconsistencies and those contradictions, and that's at its best. It's rebel propaganda. It's an actual attack on the Death Star. One little proton torpedo through a 2-meter hole, and the thing goes boom. So. Yeah,
I mean, if you look at empires in history, Britain, Russia, Rome, Russia, even America, well, why do we have victory? Because we go out for people who are weaker than us. We're not. When you actually, you can have a well-trained army, even if you don't, it's like if you're going after an even weaker person, it's like, yeah, of course you look strong by comparison because everyone's weaker than you.
True.
And then once you actually have someone who can actually match toe to toe with you, then shoot. Now we're in trouble. Now we actually we don't look as tough anymore. So the big bully in the playground looks like a wimp compared to, being, or it's sort of like, when you all come together, you can take down the big bully in the playground. So,
or we have to demonize it, like with the Soviet Union, now with China, right? You see, I mean, and Russia's a bit of a different case because there's clearly problems going on there. But China, is China as a society any morally worse? You could make that argument. You could say that there isn't the same democratic freedoms and freedom of speech and freedom of commerce and enterprise, small business, but they're a pretty prosperous society too. And I mean, again, there are metrics, but it's not to say that Western society is any better, or it's not to say that Chinese society is any better. It's, are we, or are they not that much worse? Are we still that much better? I'm trying to find the words to say it, but it's not like I'm saying China is up here and we're kind of here. Or we're kind of both kind of in the mud a little at this point. A depressing thought, but do we all each have ways of things we can point to say things are actually prosperous and helpful and healthy, and the things that are very corrupt and destructive. And so that to complicate these narratives of the evil Russian Empire, the evil Chinese Empire, I mean, I'd like to see not Joss Whedon
American
himself,
Empire.
but Firefly, saying compared to the American Empire, right? Even the American Empire, I've gone on in this podcast saying how horrible the American Empire is. I enjoyed my time in California. It's American people themselves are great, and there's a lot that we owe, a lot of freedom that we owe. It's just that's again, it comes back to what I was talking about with Mon Mothma versus Saw Gerrera. Is you know, it, Mon Mothma is open to complexity and complex realities and multiple realities, and even those contradictions, and moving through, even trying to appeal to Korsh Panaka, and uh, going back to the Senate for testimony, and it not being a naive thing. Um, you know, that complexity of saying, okay, then we get evidence that that's not going to work. I have to go and form this rebel alliance. But even then, it's not always this radical. We're going to kill civilians. We're going to achieve victory at all costs. It's we're going to go attack a military base, and in order to get these plans for this Death Star, it's just the heightened complexity of it. That to me is the most powerful thing of all, is and most compelling thing is someone who can engage that complexity and build coalitions and find ways forward.
Right. I don't have them in my notes, but I want to talk just a little bit before we get to the last big point of Chirrut Imwe and Baze. Because I would feel remiss if, like, we talked about Jin, we talked about Andor, we talked about Mon Mothma quite a lot. Let's talk about these two. I really like these two because these are very much they bring the spiritualism of Star Wars for a movie which, almost didn't have a lightsaber, unless with the Vader scene. Like, without those Vader moments, like, you really don't have any connections to the Force. But these two kind of really bring in kind of that more spiritual side of things. I just really like them. I don't really have a point to them outside of the radical protest politics, but, like, they're both really interesting. Baze kind of has given up, while Chirrut has definitely kept the faith. And I like how in the end, it's like, by the end, Baze kind of has somewhat of his faith restored to make for just one last sacrifice with his friend his friend.
I mean, the point for me is they remind everyone that there is a reality beyond simply brass tacks politics. There is this unity of the galaxy and the universe that is for the furtherance of life. And I fear nothing, for all is as the Force wills it. That it'll actually turn out okay, as long as we submit to the will of the Force. And I'm one with the Force. The Force is with me. That mantra. That
That's a good line.
Yeah, it's a great mantra. So, I mean, I'm all for that. It brings me to one quick real world story of I had a professor who was taking a summer class, a theology prof, and he was part of in a previous iteration of his career. Was part of the Jesuit center in the midst of, and so like a kind of basically a chapel, and I'm not too sure what it entailed, but intellectual spiritual resources amidst a lot of other groups doing community organizing work, and community organizing, probably some protest, probably some very practical things about job search and sharing food and all these things. A lot of great actual inner city, speaking of protest politics, great protests that go forward. A lot of great work that these organizations do, and they, my prof and his group were say, oh, we're not doing enough. We're just praying and studying and giving you intellectual resources for your work. We should actually be doing more practical things. And the group actually, the rest of the community actually said, no, you're this contemplative center that gives us the strength to carry on amidst such dark and difficult circumstances. And I mean, Chirrut and Baze do end up actually taking action, but they also have this reminder of to stop and slow down and hear, just like Luke and Rey on Octo, hear the birds, smell the flowers, literally, get a sense of the interconnectedness of all life, so that when when it is time to kill, or when you can tell someone's gonna go kill, but it's kind of off, you can sense that the dark side is moving around. With Cassian about to assassinate Galen, to have that sense of what is going to be the furtherance of life and flourishing.
Very much. And now for the final point, and one of the more besides fucking comment, I did not. One of the one of the more complicated parts is Bodhi and Galen and collaboration, redemption, but also collaboration knowingly so for the acts of sabotage. And I think this was one of those things. It's like a lot of people made fun of it or got mad. It's like, oh, did you really need this? It's like, no, we really don't. But I think this movie actually makes it interesting. If like Galen intentionally helps make the Death Star, but intentionally also puts a weakness in the Death Star. And I think people would argue like, oh, Galen should have shot himself or something like
You see the face I'm making right now. Come on.
I know, like, because he should have done this and that, and like, Galen should have done it. Like, but
Mhm.
Galen. I think Galen was smart enough to know about just if someone else was gonna do it, someone else was gonna make the Death Star eventually. So you know what? I kind of not in a no-win scenario, but I guess I can do this one thing and make this one weakness. So it's like the Death Star does have a vulnerability; it can be destroyed.
Mhm.
I know that's sort of the interesting thing about people who do stay, but they stay to try to curtail the worst aspects of the evil regime in almost in a naive way. But I think Galen is in a smart way. I think he's very much aware that the Empire is an evil organization. It's like, well, at least I can do something within, and maybe someone will notice and use this weakness to destroy it. Bodhi obviously kind of realizes too, and that's why by the end he decides, I'm going to help. Galen, sends him off to, go to Saw Gerrera. Yeah. I find that very interesting. The complexities of staying with said regime, but also trying to either curtail its worst aspects, which I always think is a bit more of a foolhardy errand in some way. But if you're trying to actively destroy said regime, I think you're in a better mindset for that. But yeah, that's my opening salvo for that.
Galen Erso is one of the greatest heroes in Star Wars, in especially in this era. It was completely necessary. There's not a question in my mind that the way that flaw comes about, so much better, so much more interesting than I don't know how it alleges with like just Imperial incompetence or
it exists. It just
or just there they miss it or something. No, this is an incredible story of someone who sacrifices himself, both sacrifices his own well-being by enduring this plan to its fulfillment, and then in the end, he sort of sacrifices himself for he's willing to take the risk of sacrificing himself for his engineering crew, knowing that Bodhi is already gone and the leak has already been made. And so, to me, it's again, you talk about complexities. You talk about what is a hero? Is a hero someone who can stand up in front of the First Order with a laser sword? Well, maybe sometimes, but in this case, it's someone who toils away, learns to lie, sacrifices, loses his family, and can't this poignant moment where he can't even think about Lyra and Jin because it's just too much and would overwhelm him, and he would quit. And to endure that plan to the end, it's nothing less than heroic. And we're talking about changing the way we view A New Hope, right? That's it right there. My favorite scene in Rogue One, oddly enough, it's the hollow message of where he spells it out. But I mean, this is great film writing, script writing. It's exposition, but in this highly emotive character moment with Jin through the hollow. But you see his motivations. You see the fire inside of him to carry on this plan that ultimately does come to fruition and leads on. I mean, Jin doesn't have the message, so she has to inspire people to believe her, even though there's the concrete evidence. And then, of course, they get the plans and that incredible ending to this film, and then, of course, everything with New Hope. So, and it's one of those things about lore and backstory that I'm really glad we got to see, that they didn't leave this a mystery. That, I mean, John Knoll in his initial pitch, what could what could be a great moment 40 years after A New Hope to what's the great story to tell, the story of how they got the plans to see this and to know that there is this flaw. Yeah, I mean, you want to again talk about nostalgia versus, you know, recontextualizing the story anew. Galen is the recontextualization of this story.
Oh yeah, Galen's great. The original guy was like completely whack. Like the original scientist dude was
Yeah.
completely like complete wacky. Like it's like he got punished by dying, but then the Emperor put his essence in the clone body, and then he killed him again. They kept putting him in the clone body to kill again,
Oh,
and then he
legends.
built a whole bunch. And he built a bunch of other stuff too. He's like really weird. But
Yeah.
yeah, I don't know. I love Galen.
Yeah.
Galen is great.
Great
Again,
performance by Mads
Catalyst.
Mikkelsen too. I just will say, incredible performance. Yeah.
Oh yeah, it's like Matt Mikkelsen's got range. Like he can play a bad guy, he can play this sad scientist with a family. Read Catalyst, by the way, because
Yes.
you know he is another great insight into Galen's mind.
Yeah.
Um,
Great novel.
and just and also his relationship with Krennic and Lyra as well. Like like that those three form such an interesting triad, or heck, I would go first. Like they form an interesting love triangle. Uh, but uh, but uh, I yeah, Galen's great. You know, Bodhi's just as good as great as well. You know, kind of again, much like Galen
Mhm.
for the Empire, realized it was bad, and now finally decide, you know what, I'm gonna do something about it.
Yeah.
For
Yeah. So you think using
for
his intelligence about yeah, similar to Finn, you know, fly low so the tracking can't find him, you know, things like that.
exactly. It is interesting, kind of seeing again the Empire. I mean, that's sort of one of the arcs of the Empire, and just the overall new canon is
Mhm.
the longer people have stayed with the Empire, they thin out the kind of the squishies, like I'm going to call them, and they keep the radical true believers. It's like, okay, like clearly you tolerated one Death Star, now you're tolerating a second Death Star, now you're tolerating Operation Cinder. At what point, like essentially, at what point are
Yeah.
you just irredeemably bad at that point? And that's sort of the whole
Yeah.
point of Cinder. It's like weed out the weak, and then and now you get like even in Mandalorian. Now you're just stuck in the First Order. You're just stuck with the crazies,
Mhm.
with
Yeah.
that hardcore base, and now you've lost sort of. People are kind of like, I'm only working for the Empire. It's give me a paycheck.
Yeah. It is interesting because we talk about humanization and dehumanization. I mean, there's a reason Sloane has been off the table, right? It's the reason, you know, Carice Sindian is kind of the face of this in Bloodline, right? Uh,
Mhm.
not relatable characters at all. And so because Sloane is a relatable character, Sayana Ray is a relatable character, incredibly. Um,
Relatable character, but he's definitely founding the First Order. So
well, Sindian is. I'm saying Sloane is more relatable. I just think I don't know how involved she is going to be in the First Order. You know, if he says, do he thinks? I mean, that's all speculation
that's
and
actually
whatnot.
no, that's confirmed that she was part of the First Order, the
Okay,
first set
fair
of
enough.
leaders.
Okay, fair
In the
enough.
Phasma.
But yeah, but like I guess the question is, how far does she go with it? Does she stick with it, or does she? I mean, because we know, her conflict with Gallius Rax is not my empire. You know, similar to Sienna. So in a way, not to the same extent, but at least Sienna needs Thane to literally knock her out so she can see it, or whatever happens at the end of that novel. But yeah, it's a good question. I mean, but my point being, the reason we haven't seen Sloane, one of the reasons I think, is because the First Order has to be irredeemable, um, or the only part of it that can be redeemable ultimately is Ben Solo. Similar to maybe the only way Vader can be redeemed is through Luke. I don't know. I'm just drawing these connections now, but yeah, that is a
What we
great
do
point
here.
that you make about the progressive dehumanization and irredeemability. Make that word up of the Empire. I appreciate that word.
I mean, yeah, I
Yeah,
mean, the Empire is bad. Full stop. It's like
sure.
it gets worse and worse every year. It's like I mean,
Yeah.
that's kind of Bail Organa's whole thing at the end of Solo. It's like, not Solo, Kenobi. It's like the Empire is growing bolder,
Yeah.
stronger, bolder, doing and then that's gonna Andor. We're gonna see in like Rogue One is sort of like the apex
Yeah.
of it. But yeah, that's kind of all I have, and it's like I'm curious to see. Again, well, let's talk about Ray Sloan maybe some other time. I got some thoughts on that too.
Yeah.
Because she's a fun character.
What's she actually doing? Where is she? Why haven't we seen her? I mean, I've brought that up a little bit, but
did Snoke kill her? I don't know. Who knows?
Maybe.
But yeah, that's kind of all I got for Rogue One. Definitely in my top 3 Star Wars films. Definitely top in my Disney era Star Wars movies. I'm so excited for Andor to kind of continue on its legacy and its work, both in terms of what it brought to Star Wars, how it portrays Star Wars, how it shows that side of the universe, and yeah, I'm excited for Andor. One more week to go.
Just over a week to go. Yeah. So, yeah, pretty good. Yeah, and I don't have any more thoughts to add. Again, can't wait till for Andor to come out, and yeah, so might as well. I figure. You think? Are we good? Is that a good place to wrap things up there, Joel?
I think so.
All right, might as well. Thanks for joining us, everyone. Again, if you liked what you heard, you have some thoughts, add it in the comments below, or let us know on social media. We always appreciate all the interactions we've got going on there. Give this video a like and a share. Subscribe to the Star Wars Underworld channel, and yeah, we got our Ion Canon channel over there. Again, follow us also on Spotify, Apple Podcasts. Again, Google and Stitcher and other podcatchers are on their way. On Twitch, if you found us there, thanks for joining us as well. Joel, where can they find your personal Twitters?
You can find me at JID 2021. Again, JID 2021. I also do a lot of the at Ion Canon Pod Twitter myself, so you can always see what I'm up to there as well.
And on Twitter, NEUG485, you can get some Star Trek, soccer, other thoughts there. I get some Twitter. I engage in some Star Wars stuff with that as well. Of course, also at Ion Canon Pod on Twitter and Instagram. My personal Instagram, MNEUG1138. I got some pictures. You will get some pictures of my nieces going to preschool. Enjoy that as well. It's pretty great. But also, get some convention photos, different things going on there. Again, Ion Canon Pod, Twitter, Instagram. Yeah, and of course, check out the Tractor Beam on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Ion Canon Pod, also the SW on Twitter and Instagram as well. Lots of great conversations going on there. Patreon, Star Wars Underworld Patreon. I'm gonna maybe start plugging that a little more. I got some great tiers and benefits there as well. Next week we're going into, I believe, we're going this book here that's been kind of staring, Princess and the Scoundrel by Beth Revis. I finished it yesterday. Pretty great novel. We're gonna give our thoughts and review. See, maybe have a guest or two lined up. We'll see what happens there. But for now, Joel, let's blow this thing. Let's blow this Death Star and head home.
Bro.